The first time I heard his voice, it was through a video. Calm, measured, smiling. But what he said chilled me to the bone. On May 23, 2014, in Isla Vista, California, Elliot Rodger murdered 6 people and injured 14 others before turning the gun on himself. He stabbed 3 men in his apartment, then drove through the town shooting strangers, mostly young women, outside sorority houses, restaurants, and sidewalks, all while narrating his own righteousness in a chilling manifesto and a YouTube video titled Retribution. He was 22. The media called him the Virgin Killer. But what I saw was more complex. This wasn't just rage. It was a slow, cold cultivation of hatred fertilized in silence, watered by rejection, and finally bloomed in blood. Elliot wasn't born a monster. He was born a boy with soft brown eyes, a soft-spoken voice, and a longing to be seen, to be touched, to matter. He left behind a 137-page manifesto. But even before he wrote a single word, the story was already there, folded in like a crumpled piece of paper shoved deep in a drawer. Forgotten, ignored. So I began to ask, what makes a child dream of revenge? What makes a boy look into the eyes of a stranger and pull the trigger without trembling? When does the seed of violence first take root? This is not a story of blood. This is the anatomy of a silence too long ignored. And if we dare listen closely enough, we might still hear it. The sound of a door quietly locking. From the inside, he was born into a home of glass. From the outside, everything shimmered. A film director father, a glamorous stepmother, trips to premieres and bedrooms that looked like catalogs. But inside, everything cracked. Elliot Oliver Robertson. Rodger entered the world on July 24, 1991, in London. His parents soon moved to California, where dreams were sold in gold and children were raised behind closed doors. He was small, quiet, fragile, a boy who didn't cry loudly, who played alone, who clung to routine the way a drowning man clings to driftwood. His mother once described him as sensitive. His father called him shy. But in his own words, Elliot called himself invisible. At night, when the adults fought in sharp whispers across the hallway, he would curl up in his room, clutching a teddy bear with matted fur and one eye missing. No one remembered its name. Maybe he never gave it one. He learned early not to make noise. The sound of a slamming door, the clink of wine glasses breaking. His parents divorced before he turned 10. After that, he was passed between homes like a suitcase. Each time he packed neatly. Each time he waited for someone to ask if he was okay. No one did. His journals would later reveal how deeply he craved attention, not the spotlight, not fame, but a single focused gaze that said, "I see you. I really see you." Instead, he got silence, indifference, busy grown-ups and locked rooms. The first time he spoke to himself in the mirror, he was 11. He whispered, "I'm going to be something one day." Then he smiled, and the teddy bear sat there slumped in the corner watching with its one good eye. Was that the first time the room got too quiet? Even for a child. He was always the last one picked. At recess, the other boys ran wild across the yard, chasing soccer balls, teasing girls, wrestling in the grass. Elliot stood at the edge, hands in his pockets, watching. Sometimes he pretended to tie his shoes just to look busy. Other times he counted the clouds. No one noticed him. Middle school was the beginning of the fracture. Kids that age are sharp, not with intelligence, but with cruelty. They can sniff out weakness like blood in the water. Elliot didn't talk like them. He didn't dress like them. He didn't laugh the right way. His quietness wasn't mysterious. It was mockable. He was called weird, creepy, faggot. By 8th grade, he stopped trying. He ate lunch alone, often with his back to the wall. He never raised his hand even when he knew the answer. And when he was bullied, he didn't fight back. He stared, blank, like his mind had somewhere else to be. Teachers saw a quiet boy with neat handwriting, but they didn't see the notebook where he wrote. They all walk past me like I'm air. Maybe one day they'll choke on it. At home, he played video games for hours, controlling characters that others respected. In digital worlds, he was powerful. In real life, he was fading. He once asked a girl in his class if she wanted to study together. She laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, just enough to sting, enough to turn admiration into something colder. That was the day he stopped asking. And the next morning when he walked into class, something had shifted. His desk wasn't just a desk anymore. It was a fortress, a place to hide behind. Or maybe a place to aim from. Puberty didn't bring transformation, it brought confirmation. The others changed, broadened shoulders, confident laughs, flirty eyes. Elliot remained small, still, like a boy out of step with time. His voice barely deepened, his face stayed boyish. But inside something else was maturing. Not strength, not self-assurance. Resentment. He began talking to himself in whispers. Little rehearsals in the bathroom mirror, conversations where he won, where they begged to be his friend, where girls touched his arm and he smiled back. But when he stepped out of that mirror, the real world never played along. So he began to lie. He told people he had a girlfriend back in another city, that his family was wealthy beyond imagination, that he'd soon become a famous director. The lies weren't about impressing others. They were about survival patching over a crumbling self-image with stories thick enough to hold together. Once in high school, someone took his seat in the cafeteria. A small thing, but to him it was war. He stared at the boy's back for minutes, fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. He didn't say a word, but later that night in a Word document he wrote, "They act like they own the world. I'll show them. One day they'll see who I really am." He stole a pen from the school office. Not because he needed it, but because he could. It was a test. Would anyone catch him? Would anyone even care? No one did. That's when he realized he could wear a mask. He could hide the storm. Smile politely, nod at the teacher. Thank the barista. Go home and scream into his pillow. Or whisper to himself, "They don't know who I really am." And worse, they don't care. By college, Elliot had learned the rules. Say hello, hold the door, smile at small talk, nod when others laugh. He played the part well. Clean clothes, carefully gelled hair, sunglasses that hid the way his eyes scanned the world like a battlefield. But behind the curtain, the emptiness grew louder. He enrolled in community college, drifted through classes. There were acquaintances, sure group assignments, brief conversations. But no one ever got close. And that was just how he wanted it, or at least, that's what he told himself. He became a master at mimicry, laughed at jokes he didn't understand, complimented people he envied. He even rehearsed emotions in front of the mirror, joy, interest, curiosity, like a method actor preparing for a life that didn't quite fit. But it wasn't real. Not the handshakes, not the small talk, not the parties he stood in the corner of sipping soda like it made him part of something. He wrote blog posts about fashion cars and luxury things he didn't own but desperately wished could define him. He curated a version of himself that might finally be accepted. A mask so perfect even he wanted to believe it. But there was one crack he couldn't smooth over. Love. Every rejection burned like acid. Every couple holding hands in public felt like a personal insult. He'd never kissed anyone. Never held a girl's gaze longer than a few seconds without it turning awkward. The longing grew sharper, not just for sex, but for validation, for someone to look at him and say, "You matter, I choose you." But no one ever did, so he smiled harder, polished his words, hid the rage in silk and cologne. And one night while staring into his webcam, he asked softly, "Does anyone even see the real me? Or do they only see the suit I hang over the silence?" It didn't happen all at once. Rage rarely does. It built slowly like smoke curling under a locked door. Whispers, slights, glances, rejections. Moments that others forgot within seconds. But Elliot remembered them all, cataloged them, played them back in bed at night like scenes from a cruel movie in which he never got the lead role. Then came the final crack. He stood outside a sorority house one Friday night, alone. Again. Girls in short dresses walked past him, laughing, brushing shoulders with boys who didn't even look at him. He had rehearsed a line, something casual, but as he stepped forward, one of them looked right through him. Not with hate, not with fear. Just nothing. Like he wasn't even there. He didn't speak. He turned and walked away. That was the last time he tried. That night he wrote for hours, pages and pages of trembling thoughts, half manifesto, half confession. He called it his day of retribution. The words weren't chaotic, they were cold, precise, like a script already memorized. If I cannot have them, no one will. If I cannot be loved, I will be feared. A week later, he visited a gun range, practiced, perfected his aim, wrote more, filmed himself smiling into the camera like a host of some twisted late-night show. His voice was calm. His eyes were not. They were vacant. He called women wicked, called men brutes. He blamed the world for not recognizing his greatness, for robbing him of what he believed he was owed. And in one chilling entry he wrote, "The first time I saw her eyes, they were completely empty." He wasn't talking about her. He was talking about himself, and he didn't look away. It began with a smile, not the kind that says I'm happy, the kind that says I've already decided. On May 23, 2014, Elliot Rodger sat alone in his BMW. The sun was setting over Isla Vista. Palm trees swayed. College kids walked the streets in tank tops and sunglasses heading to weekend parties. The air smelled like summer and freedom. He rolled the window down, listened to the music playing from another car, something upbeat, something careless. And he hated it. There was no panic in him, just clarity, a stillness that had taken years to reach. He had rehearsed this night too many times to feel fear. The weapons lay next to him. The camera had already captured his final words. "I am the true alpha male," he had said. "I am the supreme gentleman." His manifesto, emailed minutes before, was already making its way to the inboxes of family therapists' old classmates. But none of that mattered now. He drove, stopped at the apartment he shared with two roommates, stabbed them both. Then a third visitor, precise, silent. His journal later read, "They were simply obstacles in my path." Then he got back in the car. What followed was a pattern of shooting, driving, shooting again. But this isn't about bullets. This is about the mind of a man who believed he was finally in control. He wrote, "For once I felt powerful, like a god deciding who lives and who dies. I didn't shake, I didn't sweat, I smiled." He wasn't high, he wasn't enraged. He was ready. And when it was over, 6 dead, 14 wounded, he looked into his own reflection in the rearview mirror. There was no regret, no horror, just quiet. And then he pulled the trigger one last time. They say when someone dies by suicide, their eyes go first. But Elliot's eyes had been gone long before he pulled the final trigger. The moments after the massacre weren't dramatic. There was no high-speed chase, no last-minute standoff. Police found his body slumped in the driver's seat of his BMW, the interior soaked in blood, and broken glass, his handgun still warm in his lap. Inside the car was a USB stick, a 137-page manifesto, a pair of sunglasses, a crumpled tissue. No farewell note, because in his mind the killings were the farewell. The act itself was the message. And I've always wondered, if he had survived, what would he have done next? Some murderers fall into immediate regret. Others spiral into addiction or disappear into shadows waiting to strike again. But with Elliot, the answer is harder to find because he didn't just kill people. He killed the part of himself that still wanted to be loved. His writings in the weeks before the crime showed no fear, only preparation. He didn't drink, didn't do drugs, didn't gamble. His addiction was power. His fantasy was control. Even after the murders, in his journal's final words, he wrote, "For the first time in my life, I felt free." That line haunts me. Because it wasn't joy, it wasn't satisfaction, it was relief, like exhaling after holding your breath for years, like closing a door so slowly that no one hears it latch. I believe Elliot didn't expect peace. He expected nothing. And in that nothingness, he found what he called freedom. But freedom from what? From pain, from rejection, or from himself? And if so, what part of him died first, the boy or the hope? Sometimes I imagine he survived. The gun jams, the police arrive. They drag him out of the car alive, bleeding but breathing. And for the first time, Elliot Rodger has no script. No manifesto to hide behind, no video to perform, no audience to impress or punish. Just 4 white walls, a metal bench, a camera in the corner, and silence. I've sat with people like him, young men whose crimes echoed louder than their names. And when the adrenaline fades, when the mask slips, something else always emerges. Not rage, not evil, just a kind of emptiness. A haunted boy sitting in the body of a killer still waiting for someone to ask why. If Elliot had lived, he would have been charged with 6 counts of murder, 14 of attempted murder, and the weight of a nation's grief. He would have faced courtrooms reporters' cold cross-examinations. But the true trial would have come at night when no one was watching. Alone in a cell stripped of performance, who would he be? A monster? A manifesto? Or just a scared child who never learned how to be a man? His eyes, I imagine, wouldn't glare. They'd avoid contact, flicker to the floor, blink too slowly like someone waking from a very long sleep.
And if you asked him why he did it, he might shrug.
He might smile, or he might finally whisper, "I just wanted to be seen." But no one sees you in prison. They only see what you did. Not the broken teddy bear, not the boy at the edge of the playground, not the empty room where a voice once echoed, "I'll be something one day." Just a name and a number. Elliot Rodger didn't start with a gun. He started with silence. The kind of silence that grows in homes where emotions are inconvenient, in classrooms where quiet boys go unnoticed, in friendships that never quite form, in hallways where someone walks by you like you're not real. It's easy to dismiss a killer like Elliot as evil. Easier still to distance ourselves, to say he was sick, abnormal, not like us or our children. But what if someone had listened? What if years before the manifesto, someone had sat beside that lonely boy on the playground and asked, "What's really going on?" What if a teacher had seen beyond the good grades and asked about the quiet? What if a therapist had looked past the politeness and heard the pain? We'll never know. Because Elliot's story isn't just about misogyny or mental illness or access to weapons. It's about the cost of disconnection, the violence that brews when someone is left alone in their own head for too long. He believed the world owed him love. But maybe what he really wanted was witness. Someone to look him in the eyes, not with fear, not with blame, but with the honesty of presence. To say, "I see you, I hear you, and you matter," before you break. But that didn't happen. So he made the world look. With bullets. With blood. With a video and a smile. We don't tell these stories to excuse them. We tell them to understand the architecture of a soul collapsing in slow motion. Because Elliot Rodger is gone. But there are others. Others staring at the floor in silence. Others writing long messages no one will read. Others rehearsing smiles in mirrors and wondering if they'll ever be enough. And the question remains, will we see them before they stop asking to be seen?